How can we make the holidays less stressful? Well, for this, I have invited Douglas Bertram, and he knows a lot about stress and how to deal with stress physiologically, not only emotionally. So he will teach us some biohacks we can use to get the parasympathetic nervous system, that more relaxed nervous system, amped up so that we can feel more centered and more at ease during the holidays. Hey, Doug, so nice to meet you and have you on the show. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I said in the introduction that stress is what a lot of people experience during the holidays. And I think stress has a multi-layered effect on our entire system. But I wanted to ask you, how do you see stress and what does it do to our mind and body?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think that in order for me to talk about stress, I like to just start by saying I don't think stress is a bad thing. Okay, so I think stress is is a what allows us to respond to the demand of a high demand situation. And so you mentioned around the holidays, well, there's lots of triggers and there's lots of high demand, right? I mean, we get busy. We have to, travel around and we have to get the kids ready and we have to go to in-laws and maybe some of those in-laws we haven't seen in a while, which inherently can be a little stressful. And, so it's asking a lot of us, right? Is how I relate to stress. And so any situation that is asking a lot of us requires our body to respond with a stress response. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just all about how we deal with it and the skills that we deploy to make sure that it doesn't become a negative.
I think, stress is natural, absolutely. But don't you agree that sometimes we are, because we don't have the skills on how to deal with stress, overloading our system with stress hormones and all the effects it has. And that is
Without
certainly
question.
something that also then leads to bad compensatory habits where we are feeling like, well, I'm stressed, I'm going to drink a little bit more or eat a little bit more sugar or I'm going to veg out a little bit more, only
No
adding to
doubt
the
about it.
stress effect.
No doubt about it. And the again, using this definition of stress is how our body responds to a high demand situation. The inverse is also true. It only becomes detrimental if when we are in moments of low demand, if we don't use those moments to recuperate. And that's the ticket right there. Is we're not going to ever eliminate the stressful triggers, the high demand situations where we're being asked to respond. It's in the small moments where we're no longer in a high demand situation that we don't take the opportunity to recuperate and restore ourselves.
I mean, you talk about that we can use stress for our advantage. So make stress work for us rather than fighting the stress. What do you mean with that?
Well, stress is how we get stronger. I mean, every time you go to the gym, you're stressing your body, and it's through stressing the body that the body adapts to get stronger. We only develop our immune system through being exposed to small amounts of bacteria and viral load that cause us to learn and adapt. And so, stress is the process of which we force adaptation. So without stress, you wouldn't evolve, you wouldn't be, you wouldn't learn, you wouldn't, become stronger and more resilient. The problem with what most people where they get into trouble is they continue to react as though they're in a dangerous high demand situation when it's time to go to bed, when it's time to relax and to restore and put your body into what I refer to as a parasympathetic state where it's time to rest and digest and relax and repair. And a lot of people will carry the stimulus from the high demand situation and they'll carry that into the low demand situations. So if you got cut off on the highway, well, that may have been a very dangerous, very scary thing that really spiked a sympathetic response and got your adrenals and your stress hormones firing on all cylinders. Well, when it's time to go to bed that night, you're no longer at risk of being run off the highway. But if you're still, in that sympathetic drive and your heart rate's going and your stress hormones are still continuing to be active, that's when stress starts really having a negative effect. In order to not do that, we have to learn awareness. We have to be aware that that's happening, right? By understanding what stress feels like in the body and recognizing, oh, I'm clenching my jaw. Oh, my heart's racing. Oh, I'm breathing very shallowly. And then once you are aware that you're stressed, then you have to make sure that you have tools to try to offset that and to work against the stress. And by using those tools, we can change the outcome of the grip that stress has on our lives. And we can minimize the negativity that comes from prolonged states of sympathetic drive or being in a stress response.
I mean, it's really ultimately about balance, but I like what you said about the awareness point because, first of all, most of us are not very aware of our body, period, unless it hurts. And we are often also not aware of our mind because we're so distracted by these outside noises that we don't really listen to ourselves or feel our emotions anymore. So, yeah, stress can also be in some ways, like an alarm wake up call from our system that says, okay, you are running hot, you're going on overdrive. Now, you are a person with structure elements. You found that company. You work mainly on the physical body and the fascia with acupuncture and another manual therapy. Now, I'm sure you have some hacks, biohacks that can help us de-stress. And with Empowerment Solutions, I always love to have some solutions where people, once they have awareness, actually can go to something that you could suggest to get out of the sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah. Well, the first, yes, we work with the physical body as our way in. We really focus on the fascia system as a mechanism. A lot of people don't think of, they've heard of fascia, like they've heard of fascia and foam rolling, and that fascia is the stuff that needs to be blasted and beat up and freed so that the muscles can function properly. But that's really looking at fascia as tissue. When you look at fascia as a system, it's a system of communication, and it's an organ system actually, and it's a bidirectional signaling with our autonomic nervous system. So if we are stressed, our fascia stiffens, and if our fascia is chronically adhered, it will also trigger the stress response. So it's bidirectional. It works both ways. Being in a stress state can negatively impact our fascia, and having stiff, gummed up, inflamed fascia can have a negative effect on our nervous system. So that is our mechanism, is really looking at that interface between the health of the connective tissue and how it impacts the nervous system, so that the body can best self-regulate. And we always say that healing doesn't happen in our clinics, right? We set the body up to be receptive to healing, but the healing happens from the body's own homeostatic mechanisms kicking in, right? But the first thing is awareness. And so how do you develop awareness? Well, you have to have some sort of method to listen, right? You have to first, it's like if I'm ever going to become a better golfer, or if I'm ever going to become a better runner or something like that, there has to be some measurement that I'm taking, right? In golf, it's my score, right? What's my handicap? Am I improving, right? So I have a baseline that's giving me feedback. With running, it might be my time. So yes, I'm a better runner than I was a month ago. I'm running, my mile splits are 30 seconds per mile faster. But what is our indicator for stress? Right? How do you expect to improve at being better at regulating something without a feedback loop? Okay. And so, people oftentimes just think that not being sick or not being injured or not, losing your temper and yelling at your kids, that means that you're managing your stress okay, right? But at what expense internally? Right. And so, developing some sort of baseline where you stop to take inventory is crucial if you're going to improve at the skill of managing stress.
So what would you suggest are some of those indicators to
Yeah.
measure
So
it?
yeah, definitely. If you want to get really technical, I'll start with the big ones, and then we can kind of work back into more simplistic techniques. But the big one is breath. Okay, so breath is the biggest. And can I take a deep, full breath? And can I, if you really want to get technical about it, can I manipulate my breath so that my exhalation is longer than my inhalation? Okay.
Yeah.
If you are worked up and you're really upset and you're mad and your temper's running hot, you are going to be very hard pressed to have an exhalation that is longer than your inhalation. Okay. That is one measurement right there that's saying that you're not getting parasympathetic breakthrough and that you're in a sympathetic state. So time it, right? I mean, it's that simple.
So what would you
Take
say is a normal time for an exhalation, for a
Well,
good,
you
relaxed
should
one?
be able to achieve a 4-2-6 breath. Okay. A 4-2-6 breath is a baseline that says that you're okay, right? So a 4-2-6 breath means I can inhale for 4 seconds, I can hold it for 2, and I can exhale for 6 seconds. If you get out of breath during that 6 seconds and you feel like you have to gasp for air, you're not getting parasympathetic breakthrough, right? You're not getting a full diaphragmatic breath, and you're in a stressed state. Okay. So it's something that simple. If you really want to get fancy with it, you can use, one of the wearable technologies that measure heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is a great indicator as to how well we're doing this on an ongoing basis. So heart rate variability, for those that aren't familiar, is literally the difference of how fast my heart is beating when I'm inhaling versus how fast my heart is beating when I'm exhaling. There should be variation. Okay. And actually, the bigger that number is, the more healthy we're considered to be. If we don't have any variation in the speed of our heart rate when we're inhaling and exhaling, it says that we're not achieving parasympathetic breakthrough, that we're climbing the sympathetic ladder, and that we're staying in a sympathetic state. When we exhale, it stimulates something called the vagus nerve, which directly helps to turn on our parasympathetic, which again is the rest, digest, relax response. And if we're getting that parasympathetic breakthrough, we should see a variation in our heart rate during that exhalation. That's a number you can pay attention to. Right on the Apple Watch, if you have an Apple Watch or an Oura Ring or some of those wearable technologies, they all measure heart rate variability. And it can actually be something that's kind of fun to play with as like a, little gamification. If I sit down and do some deep belly breathing, can I get a spike in my heart rate variability as kind of a little bit of a biofeedback tool? It's kind of a fun game.
So when you are, for example, aware that you cannot do the deep breathing, but then you say, you know what, that's also for me to get this parasympathetic breakthrough. So after how many minutes would you normally expect this, breakthrough to happen?
If you're paying attention to it, it can happen very quickly, right? So if you notice, oh man, I cannot do the 4-2-6 breathing, right? But you continue to try, you'll notice that maybe within 3 or 4 breath cycles, all of a sudden you can, right? And now at that point, you're getting parasympathetic breakthrough, right? But it's not to set off any panic or alarms. Oh my goodness, I can't do a 4-2-6 breath, right? It's just to say, wow, like I'm worked up right now. I need to work on doing my 4-2-6 breath, right?
What are other
And
signs that where you would say, like, because I looked on your blog pages, and there was also talk about balance and talk about
absolutely.
body posture, two things that I think also we don't necessarily pay attention to.
Yeah. So neurologically, we're kind of hardwired to, when we're in a stressed response, for it to stiffen certain parts of our body. Our jaw is one of them, and the muscles of mastication, and the hip flexors and the front of the hips, the iliopsoas complex is another one. And this is, we talk about the sympathetic being the fight or flight. Well, if I'm thinking I might need to flee or fight, right, I need to posturally prepare to do so. So we stiffen our connective tissue and we contract certain muscles in a ready position to either run or to fight. And so there's a neurological component to that. So if people are routinely feeling tension in their hips or pain in their low back, or if they're experiencing TMJ or clenching of the jaw, those are also big indicators that, hey, we're spending a lot of time in a defensive position here. So those are good indicators. A lot of times too, when we look at if you can feel your heartbeat, a lot of people, that kind of freaks them out. They think they're having a heart attack or something because they can feel the palpitations. That's also a pretty good indicator that you're experiencing a stress response. Um, and one of the things that I love to do is, if I'm having trouble getting that 4-2-6 breath in, I love to lay flat on my back. And there's a relationship between where these different branches of the parasympathetic nervous system are located. The sympathetic is right in the middle of our thoracic spine. So if we've been sitting for a prolonged period of time in the car, at our desk, or on a device where we're looking down, and we have tension in that mid-thoracic spine, we're likely to also see a little bit of a spike in our sympathetic response. The parasympathetic is located high up in the neck, in the cervical spine and in the occiput, and down in the sacrum. So if you lay flat on your back and support the thoracic spine, you're taking some of that stimulation off of the sympathetic. And when you tuck your chin and you bend your knees and open up the SI joints, you're actually giving better facilitation for parasympathetic regulation and stimulation. And then if you do, good diaphragmatic breath in this position, you're likely to see a shift much quicker than if you're weight bearing, if you're
So you're
sitting
pulling your
or
knees to
standing.
your chest?
I don't pull the knees to the chest. I put my feet flat on the floor,
Oh,
so
just so, okay.
maintain a bent knee position, and
Okay.
that just helps to flatten the lumbar spine against the floor. That should be done on something firm. If you're in the bed or a soft couch, you're going to lose a little bit of the support that you get from the floor. And I always coach people that's only like a 3 to 5 minute exercise. You don't want to stay there so long that you compromise the healthy curvature of the spine, but you just want to be there long enough to de-escalate the nervous system and allow for that parasympathetic breakthrough to happen.
Is there also anything we can do to directly manipulate the fascia, since it is a part of, the whole system that also tenses up when we are stressed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest thing with fascia work is when we roll around on a foam roller or on a massage ball, and we kind of hunt around for where we have these little focal adhesions or these trigger points. There's kind of an idea that we need to like dig on those, right? And that no pain, no gain. And I couldn't disagree more. The
But isn't that the
idea,
whole idea of Rolfing, for
well,
example?
it's I don't agree with 100% overall. I like the idea of fitting people into 10 evenly stacked little boxes and having good postural alignment. But you can go too deep too fast. And in my
Hmm.
experience, a good Rolfer, a good myofascial therapist, a good manual therapist is going to really work with the breath, and they're going to pay attention to the posturing of their patient. If a patient is able to stay relaxed and breathe through it, that is one thing. But if they get what I call dentist chair syndrome, where they're posturing their fingers and toes, you're now adding stress to the system that is going to be counterproductive. So we need to work with that. If you go really rudimentary, the nervous system is constantly trying to answer one very basic question, and that question is, am I safe? And if the answer to that question is yes, then we get automatic downregulation, that the body already starts to go into a restorative state. If we answer that question no, we're going to climb the sympathetic ladder. So even in the context of therapy, if I'm digging on a point and it's causing the patient pain and it's triggering the answer of I don't feel safe right now, they're not going to be in a receptive place to elongate those fibers.
Hmm.
So if we create an awareness, oh man, I didn't even know I had tension there, right? And then you allow for them to soften their body, breathe, and work with the tissue as you pin that tissue and take them through a passive range of motion. You can very effectively and very quickly elongate those fibers and restore function and glide. So there's method to the madness, there really is. But
Well, I'm glad
um,
to hear that, because I certainly have been avoiding the very deep, painful, I'm so glad it's over
no,
massages for a while.
but you just used a term that I think is often misleading to use interchangeably. The idea of deep equaling painful is very misleading, because we do very, very deep tissue work all of the time. What's deeper than the central nervous system? That's the deepest tissue you have, right? And we work with regulating the central nervous system all of the time in a very passive, very enjoyable, very relaxing way, right? So accessing deep tissue is not necessarily shouldn't be synonymous with pain, right? And we can floss, nerves, and we can work with the attachments of the periosteum of the bone with connective tissue by simply rolling tissue on the bone and stimulate that tissue very, very gently. And affect the deeper structures very effectively without having to push painfully through muscle mass.
And how can you do it yourself? Let's say you're far away from you guys. What can we do to do a little work in ourselves?
Absolutely. So gentle movements, dynamic movements are wonderful. In the practices of yoga or of qigong or tai chi, things that incorporate breath with dynamic movement is wonderful, and that's a way that you have to give yourself permission to stop when you feel tightness. Yoga is just putting yourself in funny positions. It's just it has nothing to do with improving your overall well-being unless you bring the breath into the practice, right? And so for me, I'm not a particularly flexible guy. I've done a lot of ultra marathon running, and I've done Ironmans and all this stuff, and my muscles are short and tight, right? But I floss my connective tissue all the time, right? And so when I meet resistance with my muscle length, I'll add tone. I'll contract, maybe my toes towards my knee and flex a little bit, and I'll take a nice deep breath and stretch, further with the breath. And then as I exhale, I let everything relax and elongate. And so using a mindfulness practice where you're paying attention to limitations in the body, and then you're interacting with that moment of limitation with gentleness and with incorporating, full breath. That's the way to go about bringing the nervous system along for the ride.
Is there one stretch that brings the parasympathetic nervous system to the forefront very easily?
Maybe not a stretch. I mean, the position that I talked about earlier, laying flat on your back, we call that the traction position.
Right.
And again, 3 very basic steps: laying flat on your back on a supportive surface. You're then going to bring the feet flat and try to, I usually coach people into a little bit of a pelvic tilt where they bridge up and roll, kind of imprint the spine onto the floor. Do the same thing by bringing the chin towards the chest and rolling back down, elongating the neck, and then bringing the hands out to the sides, palms face up, and doing that deep diaphragmatic breath. You actually have a ligament that runs along the anterior surface of the spine called the anterior longitudinal ligament. This is a kind of a highway of a bunch of important tissue. Your hip flexors attach right onto this ligament. The crew of the diaphragm attaches right onto this ligament. The whole, pericardial sac and the mesentery of the intestines. This whole column of tissue that they call the mediastinum when you add all the tissues together. And if that column is tight, think of wearing a necktie that's tucked into the front of your pants, right? That whole anterior chain of the torso contracts forward, and then we release the head and neck with a head forward posture as a result. So having the pelvis anchored by the ground, tucking the chin, and then animating with the breath is like untucking that necktie from the front of your pants, right? It creates length through the torso, and it allows for the head to come back and restore. It allows for the shoulders to have a place to go. If our head is forward and our shoulders are forward, our whole center of mass is falling forward, which means that we have to widen our stance and turn our feet out. We also then grip with our quads and our glutes, which are our prime movers. So it puts us in an unbalanced state as we're just trying to maintain uprightness. So if we can get length along the front of that spine, and it allows our center of mass to come back, we can really free up a lot of that tension of the using those prime movers for postural uprightness, and it frees up much more efficiency for movements and a lot less effort for static standing.
And just a few minutes is enough to do that, laying on your back.
A few minutes once a day will change your life over the course of a few weeks.
That's fantastic. Well, that's already
nothing.
great.
It takes no special equipment, and 3 minutes a day over the course of a couple of weeks has life-changing impact.
Wow. Now, I have one question about what you just said. You ran marathons, ultra marathons, triathlons, all these kind of wonderful things. The one thing that I always admire about people to do this is the mindset. This ability at, let's say you run 100K and you are at 85 and you just feel like, I want to just get, what the hell am I doing here? I shouldn't be here. I mean, others are in the bar watching football. What do you do with this negative voice that wants, because that's a stressor too. How many
Yeah.
times are we in situations, especially, around family, around preparations for the holidays, where there's this little naysayer who just wants to either, poo-poo everything or criticize us or say it's going to not work out anyhow. So what is your method to just keep on going and make it to the finish line?
Yeah, no, I love that question because, a lot of people think, oh, the people that do these races must be superhuman, that they don't feel pain or that they don't, experience things like panic, and fear and anxiety. And, when I did my first Ironman, I literally had a full-fledged panic attack in the water. I mean, you're in the water with 2,500 other swimmers, and this is, 2 seconds into the gun going off. This had nothing to do with physical capability. I hadn't gone anywhere yet, but I had just an absolute panic attack. And so it is your response to that panic attack that's the difference between going another 140 0.2 miles or getting dragged out of the water by race support. And for me, it's I have a mantra that I use, and that mantra is I am more than my body's sensations. And so that one for me is really interesting because all the sensations that we feel, right? The pain that we feel in our legs, or the experience of anxiety and the tightness of the chest, right? Those are all physiologic reactions that are trying to communicate with our consciousness, right? And there's an observer there. There's an observer that can experience those experiences. And so I try to connect with who that observer is. And that observer is a consciousness, is a soul, is a spirit, whatever you want to call it, that is more than my body's sensations. And so what I can do is I can say, thank you, body. I hear you. Don't worry, like I'm not going to harm you. Trust me here. We got this, and carry on, right? And so a lot of that is not ignoring the body, is not tuning the body out, but is listening and harmonizing with that information, right? Is saying, I understand, yes, this is uncomfortable, but we are more than this sensation. We are still safe and we will be okay.
So it's empathetic and encouraging all at the same time.
Absolutely.
I love that. And I hope this is also something that the listeners can really use during the stressful times in the holidays and after, just to say, I'm more than my emotional or physical sensations. I'm more than the stress. I'm bigger than these obligations and expectations. That's a really great mantra. And I love that you are not just using the mantra, you actually have an attitude with it, a positive attitude. It's not fighting, it's not also being afraid of the sensation. It's just knowing, okay, thank you, it's there, but we'll just keep on going, because I think a lot of us are just ignoring our messages and try to not look at it because it's too scary to be aware of it.
Yeah, and or um to try to rally ourselves into a moment of bravery,
Mm,
and I think that, for me, bravery is directly correlated. A true warrior is one that's willing to be vulnerable, right? Not one that is going to block out a threat, right? So for me, it's that vulnerability. It's the willingness to be uncomfortable. It's the willingness to not know, the willingness to be scared, that unlocks true human potential.
that's exactly what I always teach my clients about anxiety. It's not the enemy, but it's a messenger, and it's also an opportunity. Like you said before, with stress, it's something where we can grow from it and become stronger with it. And that's true for all our sensations. Well, how can people find out more about your work?
Yeah, so the name of our project is Structural Elements. Structuralelements.com is the primary website that you can find out more information about our company. Our physical clinics are in Maryland and in Wisconsin, but we've launched it's called SE Lab, which is an iOS and Android app. And SE Lab is lab stands for learn and apply balance. So again, the thesis there is that we have to first learn the sensations and the awareness. We then have to apply the right skills at the right time in order to achieve this balance. And so everything from how to properly foam roll, how to properly work with mobility tools, to how to do stress management, breathing techniques, and certainly the information on proper techniques of doing the traction exercise and its benefits can all be found on SE Lab app.
And
And
that app is downloadable
yeah,
and
it's downloadable. It's in the iOS store. I mean, if you just search for SE Lab app, even on Google, it'll pop right up. And it is a subscription, but the traction exercise, as well as some of like the basics, live outside of the paywall. So you download the app, and that traction position is our gift to the world, because it's our belief that the world would be a better place if everybody had resources to manage their stress a little bit more effectively.
oh, amen. Well, thank you, Doug. This was great. I think we are all better prepared for the holidays, and we probably find ourselves all laying on the floor and doing 4 to 6 breathing, and
Exactly.
just feel more resilience growing with every breath. So thank you very much for the time that you took
It's
to
been
talk
my
to us.
pleasure.
Hi, Dr. Friedemann here. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. If you're interested in learning more about fear and anxiety, here you'll find guided meditations, webinars, and interviews with some of the most renowned experts in the field of empowerment. Delve into the over 230 videos and more to come every week.